Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast, coming to you from the beautiful Reedville neighborhood in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. Thanks so much for being part of our beautiful Reading with Your Kids family, and please be sure to subscribe to us on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you find your podcast. We have a great guest today. She is the author of Sydney Saidso. Her name is April Lee Terrell. You know, if you've listened to the show, you know that I present educational magic shows, and I love presenting educational magic shows at schools, churches, libraries, special events. I just came across this great letter. It came from Brian Sawyer. Brian is the producer of the Connect Fest Family Music Festival. It's the largest family music festival in southeast New England. And he wrote, Connect Fest wouldn't be the same without Jedley. Our post-festival attendee survey responses ranked Jedley's magic show as one of the highlights out of all the kids' family activities offered at the festival. Jedley is entertaining and uplifting, and we are thrilled to have him at Connect Fest each year. I would be thrilled to come to your community. You can find out more about my educational magic shows at readingwithyourkids.com/live. readingwithyourkids.com/live. Joining us on the line right now from right outside of Edison in New Jersey. I'm really, really excited. Our guest is an author, but she's also an educator who spent some time, helping kids in some very difficult circumstances and helping families in very difficult circumstances develop a love of reading, a love of learning, and a love of books. Please welcome to the show the author of Sydney Saidso, April Lee Terrell. April, how are you?
I'm well. Thank you. I'm happy to be on the show today.
We're excited to have you here, excited to talk to you about a lot of different things, but we should begin by asking you to tell us a little bit about Sydney Saidso.
Well, Sydney Saidso is a young girl who was brought up in Baltimore City, and she thinks she knows it all. So this is the first book in my series of Sydney Saidso. So this title is Sydney Saidso, the Miss Know-It-All Girl. And she really feels like she knows it all. She's a 9-year-old girl, and she is very popular in school. She has lots of friends, but one of her big problems is that she is a little bit of a Miss Know-It-All. She tends to tell everybody, what to do. She's not very nice, yelling at children or telling them they didn't spell things right, bossing people around. And I think she was more liked because she was somewhat feared by her classmates. They didn't want to be embarrassed by her. They didn't want her to kind of make fun of them. So they would be her friends rather than be her enemy. And throughout the book, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, I think a lot of people out there, I mean, you're speaking about that, and there are flashes, there are these faces that kind of pop through my mind of people who fit that Sydney Saidso personality from decades ago that were in my life.
Absolutely. And actually the idea behind this book was spurred because of a student in my class at the time. And also reminded me of some children that I had experienced growing up as well. So a common character in almost every schoolhouse that you'll see across the world, really. But it's interesting as she goes through this story, her friends kind of decide, I don't like the way that you're treating me. And one of the common themes is to give her a taste of her own medicine. So using that kind of metaphor, she learns a big lesson in this story on how to be a good friend. And even though she is very intelligent and knows a lot, there's ways to go about sharing what you know and helping people out rather than being a Miss Know-It-All bully.
Yes, and that's important for our kids to learn. I also love because I think this is a great way for kids to be reminded that they need to stand up for themselves and not be pushed around by a Sydney Saidso. And if that means speaking up and talking to a parent or a teacher or just letting Sidney know that you don't like the way that she's treating you, it's important for you to stand up for yourself.
Absolutely. And I find as a teacher, each child are very unique, right? They have their own, their own way of handling those types of situations. Some kids, especially when I was, teaching in the inner city, the parents teach their kids, if someone hits you, you hit them back.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the message is. So, because it's almost growing up in a very tough environment such as that, you have to fight back or you're going to get broken down. Mm-hmm. And that's what they teach their kids even at a young age. And so combating, a lot of the violence and fighting that happens is very, very tough. Even as a kindergarten teacher, I had, kids throwing chairs and desks and things at each other, and just building a safe space in the classroom was super important. So when I wrote this story, I wanted to make sure that the kids could really relate to it, because what happened in Sydney Saidso is that the kids all banded together and they decided, we're going to tease her. We're going to call her stupid. We're going to be just as mean to her as she was to us. So it wasn't a nice way to solve the problem, but they solved it in a way that would typically happen with children. And I wanted to make sure that message was very clear and not write a story that was all flowery and like, oh, they just asked her to stop. Because that's not what kids do. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Kids are going to either punch you in the face, yell back at you, or treat you the same exact way that you treated them. And so I wanted them to see it, and I wanted kids to be like, yeah, that wasn't right. But then understand what the children did in retaliation was also not a good way to solve the problem, and to think through better ways that we can solve problems even when someone is being mean to you, even when someone is giving you a lot of negativity. How do we combat that in a way that is healthy?
I really hope that, because I'm imagining as you were speaking and talking about it, and what you said rings so true. April was an educator, an early childhood educator, kindergarten teacher in a very, very challenging school district in the inner city of Baltimore, and it's a district that I've had the honor of performing in, and it is a challenging district. And what she is describing, I've found in lots and lots of inner city districts. And as you were speaking about that, I'm just imagining that there are parents or educators or other authors that are listening to this and just flipping out and going, no, we should never, say it's okay for kids to hit. It's not, never okay for them to be mean. And I'm happy, and I hope they listen to your whole statement to understand that what you did in Sydney Saidso is you portrayed what is going on in inner city schools. It's actually going on in a lot of suburban schools too.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And that, you're not just sitting there going, well, this is the way it is. It's like, well, this is the way it is. And now we're going to teach those kids that there's a better way to resolve conflicts.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's 100%. I do training for a program called I Can Problem Solve. Mm-hmm. And it's a social emotional learning program. And within that training, we talk to teachers about alternative solutions and consequential thinking, and teaching children to solve problems independently by showing them, really building their ability to come up with these alternative solutions. And oftentimes, we'll present them with a problem. Okay, the two girls were out on the playground and, Stacy stole the ball from Karen, and then they started yelling and fighting about it. What is the problem here? How do you solve it? And some kids will be like, punch her. Mm-hmm. Like, I've done this with children, and they say, punch her, beat her up, or take the ball back. And so these are their initial reactions. And it's really tough as an educator, because you want to stop and say, oh, I don't think that's a good idea, but we let the children go and we let them come up with these solutions, and then we layer on the consequences and say, well, what would happen next if, Katie did punch her back? What would happen next? Mm-hmm. And then we think through the consequences and then make a decision on which solution is best. So that's the whole social emotional learning piece that's incorporated in this book through the lens of some sort of adult intervention, right? Because we still need adults in the schools to kind of help mold and model for the kids what appropriate behavior looks like. How do I stand up for myself yet not do something harmful to another person? And that's, I think, where the huge lift is in our society as a whole. It's not limited to the intercity. It's not limited to the suburbs. It's everywhere. It's in your home. How are we navigating these types of relationships and these types of behaviors in our own home with our own children, with their siblings, right? I mean, I grew up with two sisters and we fought like cats and dogs. Right? So, those types of behaviors naturally come into the classroom, mm-hmm. right? So how are adults able to, put the impression on children to say, how can we solve these problems without violence, without name calling, without, because when we get angry, that's it. When we get triggered, you're going to react the way you react, mm-hmm. right? And sometimes it's not so pretty, even with adults, right? So adults tend to look at children and say, oh, you shouldn't fight. And next thing you know, they're driving down the road and get some road rage because someone cut them off and they're cussing this person out, right? So it's like we all need to kind of be able to hit the pause for a minute and step back and think about, how do we regulate our emotions? How do we think through a consequence or think through a problem before just reacting? And often these kids are just reacting mm-hmm. because they are triggered by an incident. So kind of building in, how do we think through that prior to just a knee-jerk reaction, I think is kind of like the bigger angle here is what we need to, figure out.
And I love your approach to it in that you're asking kids, how would you deal with this? I do this. Okay. What happens after you do that? Let's think about that, the consequences of your choices. And I think that's a really important skill for us to teach our kids. And much more important and much more valuable a lesson than just sitting down and going, if A happens, do B. You might feel like doing C, but do B. And our kids we can't code our kids.
No.
Because there are going to be situations where, just like, the autonomous cars, they're coded and they work great, except for, when a bicycle rider, rides out in front of the car unexpectedly. Ooh, the computer doesn't know what to do. There are going to be times in our kids' lives that a situation is going to arise that they haven't encountered in a conversation with you or with you helping them through it. And they're going to have to react to it and make some choices. And if we give them that skill of, yes, you have a choice, but what's the consequence of that choice? It's really going to help them, I think, lead happier, more purposeful lives.
Absolutely. It definitely helps them become more well-adjusted mm-hmm. and more thoughtful. And, building in their problem solving skills, because that's essentially, what we need to be helping our children with. It's how do we problem solve? So often we just give them the solution, and it's not always the best solution, right? Like, why is my solution better than something you could come up with independently? So I try these practices with my own children. I have a 5-year-old and a 1-year-old. And the 1-year-old, of course, she's just getting to her toddler years, so she doesn't really have, much going on. She's just reacting at this point to any sort of stimulus she doesn't like. She just screams and throws herself on the floor. But when my daughter, my 5-year-old, when she was about 2.5, 3, I really started just using certain language with her and, do you think this is a good idea? All of these types of vocabulary just to help her understand. Because she was very emotional, mm-hmm. and so she would get upset if she wanted to play with something and another child had it, she might take it, or she might, if she lost a game, she might throw the game at that child. So we had to work with her on, do this nicely, show me the nice way, to handle it, or, just using a lot of positive, reinforcement with her and the consequences. So if she was at school and she was, throwing something at a child or being a little bit aggressive, she came home and had a consequence. And that consequence might have been, oh, you can't watch your favorite show, or you can't play with your toys, those kinds of things. And she actually understood and drew the connection, like, what my behavior, if I'm not doing something the nice way, as a 3-year-old, that was language she understood, then I'm going to get a consequence, right? And understanding it's not nice because do you like it when somebody does that to you? So this back and forth of understanding, your friend feels upset and he feels sad when you take things from him. Do you want to feel that way? And she's like, no. How do you feel if I take something from you? And I don't like that. Well, maybe we shouldn't treat our friends that way. If you don't like it, then they don't like it either. So let's, find a different way. What else could you do if someone has a toy that you want to play with? What could you do? Oh, maybe I can ask them to play with it. I think that's a good idea. What else could you do? I could play with another toy until they're done playing with it. That's another great idea, right? So we would just go through these different scenarios, and it was like daily until, she kind of matured a bit and then was able to navigate that a little bit better and wasn't just so reactionary because I want it, I'm going to have it, because she just couldn't deal with, not having what she wants. It's instant gratification, which is common for children, right? Especially the only child, at home, she can have whatever she wants, whenever she wants. But in the school environment, so that transition was tough for her because she stayed home with my mother-in-law for, a few years while I was working. And then we transitioned her to school and we made the move to New Jersey, and just being in a room with 20 other children was foreign to her. So she wasn't used to having to share or having to wait, so she was frustrated, but we worked through it through, a lot of practice with, those social skills.
Well, I have to give you credit. My wife is also a teacher. She's been teaching for 30 years in the Boston public school systems.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And I have to give you credit. Number one, the way that you talked to your child and helped her make different choices and see what other kind of choices she had. But that you obviously took messages that you were hearing from your child's teacher. Your child did this today. And instead of reacting the way that so many parents I hear from my wife react with, no, my child never did anything wrong. What are you talking about? My child is perfect. And, I know your child is beautiful and yes, and perfect in your eyes, but they make mistakes because every child makes mistakes. And teachers and parents need to work together. They need to be partners and they're not competing with each other.
Absolutely. And I actually give a ton of credit to my child's teacher, Miss Krupia.
Hey.
Montessori, shout out. She and I worked excellent together. And, she came to the table, well, Addison did X, Y, and Z today, but this is what we tried to do to resolve it. So we were able to come to the table and actually talk about solutions together. And I would share some of the strategies I was using at home, and she would share the strategies she was using at school, and we would find a happy medium and try to use the same strategy at home and at school. So she was getting it all around. So, and then I also had to have conversations with my husband and conversations with grandma, because those were the adults around her at home, to make sure everybody was functioning on the same page, and using the same language. And it's so important and it's important for the teacher to come prepared to the table with the parent, because it's so easy to say, well, I caught Jimmy taking this toy and he's always taking toys from kids. But what happened before Jimmy took the toy, right? And then the antecedent is so important, because we need to understand how that child is processing the problem. How long was Jimmy sitting without a toy at all, right? So one funny story is we were actually observing my daughter in the school, and they were passing out instruments, and they understand how she was very, inability to wait, very impatient, was going to react if she didn't get something. And as they were passing out the instruments, some kids had to take a turn, right? Mm-hmm. Naturally. And they give the instruments to some other kids and don't give one to her. And she's looking around like, where's my instrument? And within maybe 30 seconds, snatched an instrument. And so my conversation with the teacher, when I saw that incident, they're like, see, you see? And I said, I do see. But what I also saw was she didn't get an instrument, and that she cannot wait. Whereas there are other children that have the ability to be a little bit more patient. So as we're working with her on her patience, you might want to give her an instrument first and prioritize her, because she doesn't have the ability to wait, and she's going to be violently reactive, and we want to prevent that, right? So let's try to prevent the behavior, and then over time, we can say, all right, Addison, now Johnny's going to get it first, then you're going to get your turn. So she needs to understand, oh, I see the long range. I see what's going to happen next. Mm-hmm. In her mind, she wasn't going to get one at all. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to go get what's mine because I'm not going to get one. And that was her thinking, at 2.5, 3 years old, right? So if you're giving a 5-year-old an instrument first, I think the 5-year-old can handle it a little bit better than the 2.5-year-old that's super reactionary. So it's important, like, as educators, for us to really know our kids as well. I mean, she's in the classroom with mixed ages, so it's a variety of levels, but, oftentimes there's going to be children that are just a little bit more emotional, just a little bit more sensitive, just a little bit more reactionary. And it seems like you're catering to the negative behavior, but really it's a method of, over time, decreasing the negative behavior and building the child's patience and building their ability to withstand, the frustrations or the triggers that make them react. So it's a little bit of prevention, mm-hmm. As well as, it's kind of like a balance. You got to prevent the behavior. If this is what's going to make them go off, let's try not to set the kid off, but also try to teach them how to be a little bit, more patient, I guess is the best word.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. As you're describing that situation, I'm imagining that teacher, and she sounds like a fabulous teacher, most likely turned to the child who got the instrument last, that she knew had the patience, and just said, hey, Gina, thanks so much for being patient and waiting. I'm very proud of that you're able to do that. And so there's a way to acknowledge every kid's needs and every kid's abilities. And I think that's just one of the things that my wife has done as a teacher, just that whole, as you said, knowing the kids and, mm-hmm. and trying to work in partnership with parents to better know the kids and better serve the kids. And because ultimately what we're trying to do is to raise kids who are happy and who are going to be good friends and be able to be good friends and good mates and good spouses and good workers and build a better society for everyone.
Absolutely. I mean, it's key, because even as adults, once you get into the working world, you encounter all the same types of problems that you had as a child. But you can't just react. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've sat in meetings or been, disrespected by even a leadership or principal and you want to just yell and scream. And I can't yell at that person or scream at that person. Or on email, when you get some nasty email from someone and you just want to rip them apart, because that's you're so frustrated, but you have to stop. You have to think. Sometimes you compose something and then you delete it, right? Mm-hmm. compose, delete. But those are all practices in, let me calm down. Let me really, digest the situation and problem solve appropriately and act in a way that doesn't, that maybe I can, again, stand up for myself. Because if you're disrespected as an adult, you still have to stand up for yourself and teach people how to treat you. But you can do it in a way that's respectful. You can do it in a way that's kind, right? So we don't need to toss kindness out the window because someone disrespected you. You can still kill them with kindness. And oftentimes that in and of itself solves the problem, because the person that was not kind, they know they were not kind, and they probably did it on purpose. Maybe they were frustrated about who knows what, but it also teaches them a lesson in patience and kindness. And they know now, I shouldn't, maybe talk like that, or shouldn't maybe, respond in that manner. Hopefully, at least maybe not to you anymore, because you've solved it kindly.
Yes. Yeah. As you're talking about that, I had this memory. I don't know if I shared this on the podcast in the past, but I was at one of the systems that you and I talked about, the very challenging inner city school system, and I was at a middle school and getting ready to perform for 8th graders, and the principal, and these kids were escorted into the auditorium. Each class had a police officer at the front of the line and one at the back of the line.
Wow.
And the way and usually I say hi to the kids and shake hands, and he turned, before the show started and say, "Be quiet."
Yeah.
So I sat down, and he introduced me by saying, "I don't know who in the central office arranged this, but it's here and I have no choice, so just sit down and be quiet for 45 minutes until he's done."
Oh!
And I was so angry, but like you said, it would be inappropriate for me to react to that. So I was just determined that I was going to give my absolute best performance, and I did. And to this principal's credit, he got up at the end of the performance and apologized to me. And said, "I was so wrong. I am so happy you came."
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, and it's so interesting. I can imagine, because I said, "Oh, wow." And I've seen principals that way. But if you are a principal of a school where you have to have a police escort for each classroom at the front and the back of a line, I cannot imagine what you are dealing with on a daily basis trying to run that school.
Yeah. And and one of the reasons I mentioned stories like these, and one of the reasons we talked a little bit about your opening statement about Sydney Saidso and that classroom scenario that you presented, is that I want people to understand that there's challenges in every single school system, and there are kids who are behaving inappropriately, and kids who are dealing with all sorts of issues in every school system. But there are a lot of kids in our country who are in school systems that are just an inch away from being totally out of control. And there's a variety of reasons for it. There's no one person to blame, and I don't know if there's anybody to blame, and I don't know if it helps us to point blame at anybody. But I think it's important for all of us to realize that there are kids in this situation, and we are all responsible for them.
Absolutely.
And we all have a responsibility to help lift those kids up, because it's going to make the world a better place, and it's just the right thing to do.
It's the right thing to do. I agree with you wholeheartedly. And, these children are experiencing trauma. And I think that is one of the things that people don't really realize. We think PTSD is limited to, our military veterans. But these children have PTSD, They are experiencing things we couldn't even imagine at home, the stories that I've been told. I mean, I had a student, my gosh, rest in peace, who was my first year teaching, and I saw him. He was in a different classroom. Mind you, I taught kindergarten, and I said, "Oh my, thank God he's not in my class, because I don't think I'd be able to handle him." Why did I say that? He punched his kindergarten teacher, and he was suspended for 45 days. And guess who got the wonderful opportunity to teach him. Oh, my. So I taught him, and his mother was very terrifying. And she had an older son in the school. He's about 4th grade. And I witnessed personally her in the hallway, yelling at him and attempting to fight him like they were about to be in a boxing ring. Mm-hmm. Okay. I witnessed her almost jumping over the table of the secretary to get at the principal. I witnessed her yelling and screaming at anybody who would listen down the hallway. And I am 5'1", and she towered over me at a good 5'10", and probably had a good 40 or 50 pounds on me. So as a young 25-year-old new teacher in Baltimore City, coming from the cushy suburbs of Columbia, Maryland, I was terrified. Mm-hmm. And I knew one thing was that this child's behavior is indicative of his environment at home. And I have to teach him. I have to show him that he matters. I have to show him that he is loved. And I have to break down whatever is happening, because he is not going to act a fool with me. I didn't know how to do it, but all I knew was that I had to love him regardless. And it was a rough year, but I tell you what, we had incidences 5 days a week, and every morning I had a meeting with him for about 1 minute. And I started with, how was your night? Did you eat breakfast? We going to have a good day? All right. And we would just have this talk every day. And I would rub his back. I would give him graham crackers, and we would talk. And I would just let him tell me whatever was happening, whatever his 5-year-old brain could muster. And my mom doesn't tell me she loves me. Well, I love you. So let's start the day with love, right? So I would do that. And then it would go from 5 days to 4 days to 3 days to 2 days. And then it stopped there, because, there wasn't going to be more than, he had 3 good days a week, and I was praising the Lord. I said, This is great, because there was nothing else I could do, because you know what? He would show up with black eyes. He would show up, with all kinds of things. And I couldn't even peel back the onion, afraid I was going to have to go down the rabbit hole of CPS, and then the mother was going to come after me and all these kinds of things. So this is what we have to do, as just a society in general. We have to reach down and just pour ourselves into the children that we come across. And it has to start with love. It can't be with anything else. I couldn't teach him until he knew and believed me. And I never had an incident where he was trying to hit me or attack me, maybe other students or, but it all was stemming from what happened the night before, right, or what happened that morning. Would just set him completely off. And I already knew, because there were mornings he didn't want to have a morning meeting with me. And I knew it, because I could see what his mother's face looked like when he was dropped off. And I said, oh, it's going to be a bad day. And long story short, when he was about in the 5th or 6th grade, his mom was engaged in gang violence, and she was pregnant, and they all, were burned up in a house fire because someone threw a Molotov cocktail in their house. And, old Baltimore City, those homes, they couldn't get out. So he perished along with his brothers and sister and his mom. And it was crazy. And his one brother, the one who was, having the altercation with his mother in the hallway, was the only survivor, because he was at his grandparents' house.
Wow.
So this is what we're dealing with.
Yeah.
And, so he was born without a chance. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? How can you survive? You can't.
You're yeah. And it's, I'm torn, because, this was, the Reading with Your Kids podcast, when we set up, it's like, yes, we're going to introduce parents and encourage parents to read with their kids. And that's wonderful. We're going to read these wonderful picture books, and everything's wonderful and rosy. But I, growing up in the city and having a background in social work and visiting school systems like Baltimore and Boston and Camden and Paterson, New Jersey, and I know that it's not the situation for every kid. And, And as important as it is to remind because I don't think there are many, I don't think that child's mother would be listening to this podcast right now. The parents who are listening to this podcast, the authors that are listening to this podcast, we have to understand those are our kids too.
Oh, right.
And we all have a responsibility to love them. And thank God that little child knew that you loved him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I have a feeling you and I, we could talk forever.
Probably forever.
But we want folks to make sure that they can find out more about Sydney Saidso and also find out about the things that you are doing right now helping schools. So let folks know where they can connect with you online.
Absolutely. So right now I am in the process of writing my second, I've written the book. It's being illustrated. It's called Sydney Saidso in the Cheating Disaster. So you're going to find out how she gets herself caught up in cheating in school, even though she's the smartest kid. Ooh. So that's a story that's coming along. And then you can find me at aprilleeterrell.com. And that's my website. And you can find all about the things that I'm doing with social emotional learning. I'm teaching courses and doing some consulting. So if anyone wants some consulting or some information about how to, bring SEL programs to their school, you can contact me on my website. My Instagram is ALTerrell22 and my Facebook is April Lee Terrell Author on Facebook. So you can find me all of those places. Also, my consulting business is called Academic Solutions. So if you're interested in any sort of educational consulting, early childhood is my specialty, as well as social emotional learning. You can contact me at www.academicsolutionsllc.com.
Awesome. We've had a really intense, and I think very uplifting and enlightening conversation today with the author of Sydney Saidso, April Lee Terrell. April, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me, Jed. I enjoyed my time.
Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. It's STEM Tuesday. Our guest will be our friend Jennifer Swanson. She is going to be talking to us about awesome animal antics in addition to zombie animal death eaters. Don't miss it, the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Hey, if you are the author of a great children's book, we would love to have you on our great Reading with Your Kids podcast. Being a guest gives you a chance to tell thousands and thousands of people about your fantastic book. And check it out. Being a guest, it's fun, it's easy, and it does not cost you a thing. All you need to do is to go to our website, readingwithyourkids.com, click on the contact button, let us know about your great book. We'll let you know the next easy steps. Hey, we want to thank April Lee Terrell for being here today, and of course, we want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Thank you so much for being a subscriber to the show on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you find your podcast. And also, thank you so very much for making the world a better place by always taking the time to read with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.